Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to reintroduce to you now. Alex VanHouten is a returning guest on our show. Be sure to check out his first appearance way back on episode 135 of Boundless Body Radio. Alex VanHouten is an exercise scientist, nutritionist, and performance coach with nearly 2 decades of experience in human optimization, metabolic health, and strength development. A recognized thought leader in faith-based fitness, Alex has authored peer-reviewed work for the International Sports Science Association and has published over 500 high-impact podcast episodes through the Defining Dad Bod Podcast, the Better Daily Shortcast, and the Faithful Fitness Podcast. As the founder of the Betterment Company and the Better Daily app, he has trained and mentored thousands, combining scientific principles with faith-based stewardship to help individuals break barriers and reclaim their health. Alex's work is rooted in the real-world application of exercise science. His upcoming book, Faithful Fitness, a 40-day journey of stewardship for Christians, bridges spiritual and physical disciplines, challenging believers to honor God by strengthening their bodies and renewing their minds. Alex VanHouten, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you back to Boundless Body Radio.
Dude, it's good to be hanging out with you again, Casey. It's been too long.
It has been way too long. I believe episode 135 was like 4 years ago. So it's been a while since we chatted. I actually wanted to bring that up. You and I are not like the tightest friends. We don't always talk that often. Maybe it's just something passing on social media. I don't know what it was. From the day I met you, I just always felt like you were an awesome friend. And I just have you in the highest regard and esteem. Like there's people that you're like friends with and you talk to all the time, and you're just the kind of person that I feel like if I needed to move or I needed some help with a project, like you would be on a very short list of people that I would reach out to. And I know I would expect like the most help and concern and whatever from you. So I just wanted to say that I think you're an awesome dude. I really appreciated our first episode, and I'm really glad that I know you.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate that. I know we met at the company we worked together formerly, and there's people that you meet in the fitness industry space it's usually a very extroverted community, very, very boisterous, very loud, very personable individuals. And no offense to the personal trainers that I've gotten to know over the years, but there are some that you find that's the mask, that's the skin deep. That's how they come to work, and that's fine. They're great. They're great instructors, and they help people do push-ups, and it's awesome. But every once in a while, you meet somebody, and you start talking to them and go, whoa, this well goes a lot deeper. And that's what I felt when I first met you and had the opportunity to shake your hand, and we got to talk about the things that we were passionate about and stuff. I'm like, yeah, this guy goes a lot deeper. So I feel that kindredness with you, brother, and I also feel like if I had to move a couch, you're one of those people who would actually show up. So so thanks for that.
I definitely would, man. We should just spend the whole rest of this hour just pumping each other's tires. This is great. This is the
Let's
best
do it.
start of an episode that has ever happened. I love it.
I don't know if anybody will watch it, but we'll feel great.
Probably not. Well, I'll feel great about it. Yeah. After playing ice hockey my entire life, my self-esteem is constantly just taken down by my hockey buddies just chirping me constantly. So very, very rarely do I get some kind words. So I really do appreciate that. And it is interesting. As I read in the introduction, you've been in the industry for almost 2 decades, as have I. I started in 2007. And you're right. Like, I don't fault any personal trainer for how they do things, the way they manage things. It's just you can find a lot of scamminess, I would say, a lot of like salesiness and like portraying yourself to be something that you're not, especially with social media and all that stuff. And I don't tend to see those people hang out in the fitness industry forever. Their longevity in the industry seems like it's not quite as high. And so when you find somebody who's been doing fitness, nutrition specifically for as long as you have, you kind of know, like, not only are they really good at what they do, they may have changed their mind about a bunch of things since they started their career. But I also think that says a lot about somebody's character as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can see that particularly in the supplement industry, for instance. Anybody who wants to sell a supplement, as long as there's a profit margin, it can exist as a company, right? But very rarely do you find a company that's been around for 40 years, 50 years, who are constantly putting out quality, GMP stamped, third-party tested, things that are well-researched, that are useful to people. And I always tell my clients that when they're like, oh, what supplement companies do you trust? I'm like, has it been around for longer than 5 years? Like, that's a decent indication that it's useful, if not longer, right? So in the same way in the fitness industry, the fads come and go, and the people who proliferate those fads can easily come and go as well. But when you start to tap into some of those deeper truths, scientifically speaking, and the practical application in the world of actual people getting actual results and feeling very good about recommending their health coaches and fitness instructors and trainers and nutritionists to their friends, those are the people that they've tapped into something that's beyond fads.
Yeah, well said. I really like that. You just mentioned, the science of health and fitness, and you are just top notch, one of the best at explaining and educating, which was what your regional role was with the company that we had. Is you were going around and teaching trainers the science of training. We're going to get into some of those concepts today, but first, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the faith-based side of things. So I grew up Christian. I grew up as a Mormon. I served a 2-year mission in Brazil, where we were down there trying to convert people. And I think I just got burned out of it. You know what I mean? Like, it was just so much and so intense that I don't necessarily consider myself like a Christian anymore. I left the religion and all that stuff. And so listen, dude, I don't listen to sermons, okay, ever. And in preparation for this, I listened to a sermon that you gave. You are now, and your wife, I believe, are both pastors. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dude, we're pastors at our local church.
That's amazing. That sermon that I listened to, it was given on Memorial Day 2025. You'll maybe recall it. You started with like a clip from not Band of Brothers, excuse me.
Saving Private Ryan.
Saving Private Ryan, thank you. Which I thought was really touching. And listening to that, dude, was so inspirational. It was so good. Can you tell us about your journey to becoming a pastor? I actually don't know that much about that.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. So interestingly enough, at least for me, I was raised as a Christian in a very conservative household. But in my I would say collegiate years, there was a clash of faith and rationality, really, for me. I had a very, very difficult time squaring the circle between understanding, scientifically speaking, the objective process of the world, but also this kind of, I don't know how else to say it, this ivory tower sort of faith that I saw in the world around me as well. And so ultimately, I would have told you that I came to the conclusion there was no God. And so I was, I wouldn't say I was a closet atheist. I was just a non-militant atheist. I thought that if an individual had a deep-seated belief and they were passionate about it and it guided their life well, and in my mind, awesome, more power to them. I don't want to red pill that. I don't want to ruin, the way they feel and think about the world. But as far as I was concerned, I didn't see that as a very real thing. And fast forward, that time in my life probably lasted a few years. And personally, I had an experience in my life that really brought me down to the most, I think, the most heavy and difficult thing you can deal with, which is the loss of a child. We had my niece. She's my sister's daughter. She had a brain tumor, and she's 2 years old. It's not like she did anything to contract cancer. She didn't do anything wrong. And as an atheist, I became mad at God, which is a very strange thing. I don't know how else to say it, because who am I mad at? When as an atheist is like shaking your fist at the creator of the universe, that he can make such a terrible place that a child who is ill like this could exist. And so it was a very, very strange dichotomy in my mind to both be angry at existence and the creator of existence, and also to not think he's there, and so actually through wrestling out that very difficult time, and we can get as specific as you care to hear about it. What I learned and what I found is that I could actually bring together the faith that I was brought up with and the rationality that I learned, but the question was, which one was superior? Which one subordinated the other to itself? And ultimately, what I came to is that my rationality is a tool of my faith, not the other way around. And so I'll describe this from an exercise perspective. If I say to a listener or watcher of this show that doing 20 bodyweight squats right now will lower your blood sugar, I can guarantee it. It's a scientifically proven fact. And then you, being a good listener, say, okay, I'll try that. And so I do 20 bodyweight squats. I can objectively, before and after, I can measure the effect of those bodyweight squats on myself and find that it's true. But it takes faith to stand up and do them. because nobody can do that for you. And so there's this place that I came to in my own journey where I had to decide, am I going to live my life guided by faith and then tested by rationality? Or am I going to decry faith because in my mind the two couldn't be in the same place, and so ultimately it was a decision. I think Kierkegaard called it a leap of faith. It was a decision to take steps in the direction of faith and then see what happened. And this was about a decade ago, and it turns out for me that walking in that vein, that line, some might say making Christ the Lord of my life. That's the idea of that he was the exemplary human, and that he came to earth to teach us and show us how to do that thing. So living my life that way has objectively panned out to be much more powerful for me and also for my family and my community. So
Wow.
so that's how I came to start pastoring and whatnot.
That's amazing. Dude, is this why you love podcasting? Like, I would have never known that about you. We could have
Mm.
had conversations that probably would have never come up. This is one of the most special parts about podcasting is like, I learned something about my buddy that I had no idea and probably would never have known. So thank you for sharing that. Recently, we had a rabbi on our show, and I asked him certain questions because I don't know anything about rabbis. Being a pastor, like, what are the steps to be a pastor? And is that like it's not necessarily a job. Are you compensated in any way, or is it like kind of like a volunteer type of thing? How does that work?
Great question. So I'm a lay pastor, is what you would call it in the church, which is somebody who pastoring's not my vocation. I didn't go to school for this. I'm not recognized. I can't marry you. Like I can't bring two people together and by the power vested in me. But I do a lot of shepherding in the church, is what we would call it. That's kind of a Christianese term for counseling, mentoring, and really stepping into needs. As an example, I have a group of men that I meet with every Monday morning, and we are connected in a group called MD5, Men's Discipleship 5. And what we do is throughout the entire year, we check in on our family, our faith, our fitness, our finances, and our friends. And through those check-ins, we are being good stewards with what we've been given. We're seeking to use those things well, seeking to be wise with what we've been given, and we do so in a way where we call each other out and we ask the hard questions and we stay accountable and stuff. And that's a very pastoral thing to be up to, is that. And so how I got into that really is just noticing that going to the local church, this isn't a very Christian thing to say, but Gandhi said to be the change that you hope to see in the world. And so I walk into a church community. I love the worship. I love the fellowship and whatnot, but then there'd be this gap and go, man, it'd be really great if, and that was a nice mirror to say, hey, maybe that's why God put me here. It'd be really great if guys got together and connected on a deeper level. Okay, great. Maybe I should make that space for that. And so when I started doing that, it wasn't too long after that, and my wife doing the same thing in children's ministry, that the lead pastor was like, you guys should be pastors. And so we're commissioned by the church. That is to say, we're under the umbrella of the church and recognized as pastoral leaders in our community.
Gotcha. Wow, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Again, not something I would ever really know anything about, so I really appreciate that. Let's switch over and talk about fitness. There's a few concepts I wanted to bring up with you today, and
Yeah.
you and I had been talking that we wanted to kind of bring up. But first of all, can you tell us how you got interested in fitness to begin with?
Yeah, I was originally in a fatherless home. I was about 8 or 9 years old. We lived across the street from a kickboxing school, and the man who ran the kickboxing school, he wasn't in it to make a whole bunch of money or anything. He had a big heart for kids who lived in broken homes, and so I lived across the street, and my mom talked to him. Hey, we can't really afford to pay for lessons, but my son could use being around good men. And he's like, great, bring him on. And so I started attending this kickboxing school for free when I was 8 years old. And I'd go every night and we'd beat the crap out of each other and do a bunch of exercise and stuff. And for me, this was I loved it. I loved being athletic. I loved moving my body. I loved learning how to fight. I loved just being around people who wanted to see everybody grow and improve. And I would say that's where fitness really started for me was being in tune with my body, creating a confident space for me to exist in and stuff. And when you're a young man, I don't know what your experience was like as a young man, but when you're a young man, knowing that you know how to fight is such a nice thing. You know, I wasn't a big guy, but if somebody gave me any trouble or whatever, I didn't have to retaliate. I just knew, hey, if this goes sideways, I can handle myself and I'll be okay. And for me, that was always a very powerful thing for me. Even today, as a dad, I remain physically ready, regardless of what life might throw at me. Whether my wife really wants the yard weed eated, so I've got to maintain good fitness. So in 102 degree heat, we're going to go weed eat that yard, and happy wife. Or my boy says, hey Dad, I really want to go for a hike, and so I can go 3 miles with him, and it's not a problem, and everybody's good. That level of confidence in my own body, I would say from a faith perspective, I always say that it's I don't allow my physical body to be an impediment to my spiritual mission, my spiritual journey. So I'd say from start to finish, what started my interest in fitness was noticing that there's so many powerful good things that come from being in community and taking on the discipline of doing hard things regularly.
Yeah, I love that, man. I love that concept. You also have a condition that has been a challenge in your life for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious to know, tell us about the condition and tell us how lifestyle management has helped you manage the condition. This is something I think we're learning more and more about, that there are a lot of things you actually can do about this.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So I have a genetic disorder called Ehlers-Danlos, and it's a spectrum disorder. So there's variations of Ehlers-Danlos that are very intense and difficult. Meaning, most of the individuals who have the worst versions of this, they don't live past 2 or 3 years old because their cardiovascular system just can't hang. I have one of the less severe versions. It's called the hypermobility spectrum disorder, and so what that means for me is my body doesn't synthesize collagen very well. My tendons and ligaments are much stretchier than they should be. My digestive tract is not very robust. I wrestle with what's called mast cell activation, so that's the overactivation of the immune system. When it's like it should activate a little bit for this thing, but instead it's like I'm super sick and I come down with a migraine and a fever for no reason, and that happens to me relatively frequently. So in managing this condition, the interesting thing is I had to learn in my life, this is genetic. This isn't going away. Like this isn't something I can eat my way out of. This isn't something I can take a pill for. This isn't something that I can heal necessarily from. But if I live my life in such a way that I try to make the most out of the hand I've been dealt, what I find is there's a significant difference between managing my nutrition and exercise and recovery well and my quality of life, and if I don't do those things. And so many people with Ehlers-Danlos at my age are generally hooked on pain pills and likely on medications for depression and anxiety and stuck on a couch somewhere. And if you're in that place, I'm so sorry that that's where you're at. I hate that for you. But that's very common with this disease. And those things aren't true for me. I have my hard days for sure, and I wrestle with a lot of pain. But in my life, learning how to feed myself well, learning how to move well for my body, and learning how to recover well has been a huge part of me managing this disease well. So most people don't even know I have it, which is great. That's the way I'd like to keep it.
Yeah, well, sorry for outing you on the podcast. Secrets out. Well, it's interesting because, I find myself in the space of, the low carbohydrate world, people on ketogenic diets and carnivore diets. I'm not saying that's the best for everybody. It's just saying that's what I'm into. That's what I concentrate on. And I've had several people on the show say that switching over to a fairly strict version of a ketogenic diet can help a lot. And we're seeing studies. Now, they're associative studies. A lot of them are just case studies like yourself. But, and I also think that not everybody needs to go on a very strict ketogenic diet, but you have clearly just looking at you, on this call, like you have a good diet. Whatever that is probably free of ultra processed food. It's probably low-ish in carbohydrate wherever you find yourself. Yeah, have you kind of noticed that as well? Like, if nothing else, just getting sugar and processed crap out of the diet can really help on the nutrition side of things.
Oh yeah, 100%. Not just anecdotally, we're seeing research now that if you wrestle with something that causes autoimmune issues, and Ehlers-Danlos is up there when I talked about mast cell activation, but this other categories are things like lupus, severe food intolerances, that sort of thing. Some people who wrestle with migraines, this is an immune system problem, not necessarily a problem with blood vessels in the brain, right? And what we're finding is one of the ways you can deal with that is you completely eliminate things that could cause inflammation. And if you're prone to inflammation, plant-based products can make that worse. Like ginger is really good for you. That's a thing. Ginger has all kinds of polyphenols in it. However, I don't know if you've ever taken a ginger shot and drank straight ginger juice. It burns, man. It hurts going down. Or like cayenne pepper and peppers. The plant is creating these compounds to keep you from eating them. And so it has a damaging effect on the body. Now, some people's bodies, that's hormetic, meaning it's good stress. So for instance, cayenne pepper has been shown in research to elevate the metabolic rate in individuals, and for some people, lower the amount of interleukin-6 and interleukin-3 secreted by their large intestine. But in other individuals, cayenne pepper is like the worst thing you can put in your digestive tract because you're extremely prone to damage in the digestive tract. Therefore, you end up with an extremely intense immune response. So yes, I find this in my diet 100%, that if I focus on very nutrient dense, very low processed fats and proteins, and then when I do eat carbohydrates, I make sure they're extremely high nutrient density carbohydrates with a low propensity for inflammation, like blueberries would be a great example, or blackberries. Those are great carbohydrates for me. They fuel me well, I can use them, but there's nothing in blueberries and blackberries that are gonna piss off my digestive tract and make it hard for me to filter out toxins. There's no glyphosate in my diet, that sort of thing. That I find that emphasizing healthy fat and protein intake is a huge linchpin and a cornerstone of keeping myself healthy.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, that's a great example. And it's cool that you found that out about yourself, which is a great segue actually to one of the topics I wanted to talk to you about. And it's bioindividuality. And like there's an idea that you have a species appropriate diet, right? Like most species eat certain foods and they don't eat other foods, and they've evolved in that way to be able to do that. But at the same time, people are different. And so it makes things like nutrition be really tricky because like, what is the variance? What is the delta for how different are we? Like, are we, carnivores on this side and vegans on this side? Or is it like we're mostly omnivores and we lean one way or the other? It makes it really tricky to know, who is that person that ginger is going to affect really negatively versus, somebody who can have it with impunity. It seems to be fine. So what have you learned over the years, had to unlearn about bioindividuality, and how do you help, the people that you coach and you work with understand that they need to do some experimentation to try to figure that out?
Yeah, 100%. Well, you said it really well there, and that is, look, we're all this genetic cornucopia that we're not the same. It's like a fingerprint, and it even goes further than that, although it's very difficult to study. Not only is your genetic material and my genetic material different, and so from a nutrition perspective, we might have to feed ourselves differently to get the most out of ourselves. There might be some similarities, but there's also some differences, right? On top of that, we have our microbiome, which is all of the genetic material in and on us that isn't us, right? And that's a result of the things we've eaten in the past. Maybe even we have research related to childhood trauma and the difference in microbiome 30 years later in life versus somebody who hasn't experienced childhood trauma. That's crazy town to me. But in addition, you also have the effect of traveling. So if I had traveled to Mexico, for instance, I'm going to pick up some pieces of the microbiome there, and I'm going to bring it back to Arkansas. Whereas if I've never done any traveling, I'm not going to have any of the experience of microbiomes from other places, right? So all that to say, our microbiome and our genetic material can affect the way that we process nutrients, the way that we respond from an immune perspective to foods, and then also in the speed at which we recover from things, and all of those variations, we haven't even scratched the surface of how to process that in an external way. In other words, there's not an app for it. You can't do a fingerprint and a poop test and for the app to go, aha, because of your genes and your microbiome, here is the foods you should eat that would be best for you. And we're getting closer and closer with the advent of certain AI technologies and how well we've mapped the genome and how we're starting to correlate that with specific research. But the way that I describe this for my clients is twofold. One, the best indication of what is good for you is to start by knowing what you're eating now. So as rudimentary as it might sound, we're going to become aware and start gathering data by keeping a food journal. And so that's what we do. Like, what do we eat this week, right? And then second, our goal is to improve that every single week. We're going to improve the amount of protein that we're consuming and see how that works with our digestive tract. We're going to improve the quality of our food, moving away from hyper-processed garbage, and see how that affects the way we feel and the way we respond. We're going to change the composition of the fats that we consume and see how our body fat responds, and also how cognitively ready we feel for the day. We might shift. We might have a fasting day in there where we're going to experiment with going without food for a time and letting our body heal and seeing what happens when we reintroduce food like that. And this might sound a lot of trial and error. It's because you're your own experiment. Since there's no external source that can simulate Casey or simulate Alex or simulate the listener or watcher of this. You're the only thing that can simulate the response. You're the only thing that can run the experiment, and it's a process. That's why I always like to call it learning to feed yourself well.
Yeah, dude, I love that, and it's so funny. I don't think I've ever really thought about this, but you mentioned travel. Like, yes, we're in a unique time where you don't need to get in a boat and maybe survive and maybe not over the course of several months to get to a certain destination. You can jump on a plane and go anywhere you want.
Absolutely.
That works both ways, though, because you can also in Arkansas go to your grocery store and you can buy an avocado from Mexico that didn't come from that time or place. You can buy star fruit that came from Brazil. Like, there's food interacting with a global transport system that also changes the equation.
100%. Yep. And as a I would say unhappy byproduct of that, we have a lot of things that we add to our foods now to decrease how quickly they decompose that also affect the microbiome. So my avocado from Mexico might not actually be introducing new microbiota to my life because of whatever it's been sprayed with to keep it from deteriorating in the process, right? And so that's a real issue. It's a real issue that not only am I exposed to a bunch of different food items that if I was native to Arkansas, I would never have access to, but I'm also getting all of the different pesticides and fungicides and fertilizer and all those things that I might not have been exposed to either. It's a very interesting space. It's very at the moment, it's almost impossible to predict how all of these things affect our microbiome.
Yeah, good call. On that note, do you know how old, on average, according to an article I've read, that seems to be confirmed, do you know how old an apple is by the time you get it at the store?
I imagine it's very surprising, but no, I don't.
It's very surprising. It's over a year. They call them in the industry, they call them birthday apples because they're over a year old when they're picked. I think I saw it was 14 months.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
bananas.
Yeah, and if you walk into an apple orchard and you walk down the row and there's an apple on the ground, 4 days later it's been eaten. It's got worms in it, it's decomposing and stuff. So it's not normal for an apple to be a year old.
Yeah, totally. I've had fresh picked fruit in my neighborhood and it sits on the countertop. We keep our house cool. And like, dude, within 2 days, that thing is like shriveled up to nothing. Like, it goes bad so fast. Yeah, totally. Anyway, okay. So where what is your like starting point for most people? What are some of the core concepts you like to recommend as far as the nutrient density that you already mentioned? But like, what are some of the things that you want somebody to create that base, and then, like you said, week by week, we're going to get a little better and a little better. We're going to refine things. What are some of the things that you really try to start with?
I imagine your listeners are not foreign to these ideas because knowing you and also knowing the quality of the interviews that you do, I imagine they've heard these before. But if you're just starting with your nutrition program, the foundation for improving actually comes from understanding thermodynamics. And so I'm going to be simple and complicated at the same time, or at least do my best here, because in the nutrition world we have this proliferated lie about body composition and health, that everything's just calories in and calories out. And it's a useful mechanism, and there's pieces of it rooted in science, but at the same time it's not a complete picture. And so I'd ask you and your listeners to think for a second, what is the similarity between my body and a car? I know it sounds dumb, but think about it. Like, what's the similarity between my body and a car? And you might think things like, my body and a car both run on fuel, right? My body and a car both need to be able to operate to get from point A to point B. And so this idea of calorie intake and calorie burning in the nutrition world that boils all of our foods down to just calories treats our bodies like cars for not a bad reason. That's energy, makes sense. But then we ask, what's the difference? What's the difference between my body and a car? And there's a few, notably that I'm a biological system and a car is not. But the major difference between a body and a car is that the fuel that comes into the car so that it can get from point A to point B is not what the car is built out of. What I eat becomes me over time. So when I consume food, not only is my body going to use that food for energy, but my body's also going to take the food that I consume and then take little molecules and pieces of that food and incorporate it into the new version of me. So like if I hold up my fingers here, we know that on average, 7 years from now, every molecule in these fingers will be a different molecule, meaning they're still my fingers, but they're built out of what I've consumed over the last 7 years. And so with that said, one of the things that I want my clients to incorporate into their dietary practice is I want them to understand what is worth building myself out of. What is a good building block for the man or woman that I am working to become? Like what's worth building myself out of? And from a macronutrient perspective, that's where we get this carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. This is where we get this very, very important dichotomy. And that's this. If on one end of the spectrum I have proteins, and if on the other end of the spectrum I have carbs, and in the middle I have fats, proteins are my building blocks. I build myself out of them. Every cell, every fiber, every enzyme requires proteins. Fats, in the same way, they are both structural and energetic. So they can be in the middle of the spectrum. Your body requires fats to build new cell membranes. Your body requires fats to build hormones. Your body requires fats to keep the myelin sheath healthy in your nervous system, right? So that's in the middle. And on the other end, you have carbohydrates, and those are really just energetic. They're never structurally incorporated into the body. And in that way, protein and fats are essential. You can live without carbohydrates. And so what I want people to get foundationally in their nutrition is, let's get the building blocks right. Let's eat high quality proteins and enough of them. Let's eat high quality fats and enough of them. And then when we're talking about the energy side of things, sure, you could have higher quality, higher nutrient density carbohydrates in your life, but it's a moot point in my mind if your foundation sucks. If you're building yourself out of garbage on a regular basis, the energy that you're intaking isn't going to affect your livelihood. So very simply, I like to start with the quality of the proteins and fats and the quantity of the proteins and fats in a diet, and then I like to build from there.
That's great. That was so well explained. I absolutely love that. I heard a presentation earlier this year by Dr. Eric Westman, who did that same thing. Like when he gets a new patient, he tells them like, okay, well, what are you made of? What is actually your body made of? And it just shows like you need this much protein, this much of you is water, this much of you is fat, and this much of you is carbohydrates.
Mm.
And he just does that to say like, okay, what do you think you should eat based on what you are made of? And dude, you and I did, the metabolic tests, and we had the reports that we would give people. And when I would educate other trainers, I would want them to spend more time than they would on a certain page that would show the amount of carbohydrates versus fat that somebody could store up.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at the two numbers, if you recall, like the carbohydrates that a person can store was about 1,500 if you're a female. It's nothing. 2,000 calories if you're a male, just assuming you've got more muscle mass and more storage for those carbohydrates. And what is it, like 5 or 6 pints of blood? Like you have 1 teaspoon of sugar rolling around in there, and if that gets up to a teaspoon and a half, a teaspoon and a quarter, you're raging diabetic.
Yeah.
Like it's crazy the tolerances that you have, whereas the fat, we have so much more energy per calorie in fat. And so we would just extrapolate, okay, how much do you weigh? What's your body fat percentage? That gives us the absolute fat mass. Now we can multiply that number by 3,500 to get the number of calories that you could see. And like even now, like the Tour de France is going on at the time of this recording. These guys are absolutely emaciated, and they can still have tens of thousands of calories of fat on their body.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, in somebody who is obese, that number might be 400, 500, 600,000 calories.
Mm-hmm.
So I think having that kind of framework really helps people. So I really enjoyed the way you explained that.
Mm-hmm. And from my actual undergraduate degree was in chemistry. So I always love to explain to individuals that the chemistry difference between these two things. A lot of people don't know this, but chemically, the difference between fats and carbohydrates is simply whether or not there's oxygen in it. So carbohydrates have the oxygen built right into the molecule. So when my body metabolizes carbohydrate, I don't need to rely on my lungs to supply oxygen. That's why we call it anaerobic respiration, meaning without oxygen. Whereas fat molecules, they're a hydrocarbon. They store an amazing amount of energy per gram, but they don't have any oxygen built into them. And so in order for that combustion reaction to happen, I have to supply oxygen via my lungs, via my capillaries and arteries. Like I have to supply that from the environment in order for the reaction to continue. And so what I love to tell people and what I love to teach them about their exercise practice and their nutrition practice is your carbohydrate dependence is directly enabling your cardiovascular deconditioning. In other words, I'm depending on carbohydrate burn because I'm bad at moving oxygen as a fuel source. If I teach my body how to move oxygen well as a fuel source, I will no longer be dependent on carbohydrates to exist with good energy and function. And it sounds like such a tiny thing, but just knowing I'm getting oxygen in my carbs, so I don't have to breathe well and move, and my heart doesn't have to be in good shape to be energetic. And if I start to reduce my carbohydrate intake and I'm not conditioned, I'm going to feel like garbage. Why? Because I'm having a hard time supplying enough oxygen to my body to burn fat well as a fuel source. And so it's a 1-2 punch, right? I have to nutritionally teach my body that it can burn fat well as a fuel source. And I have to, from an exercise perspective, condition my body to be able to move oxygen well so that I can burn fat well as a fuel source. And those two things are deeply connected in the relationship of building a good metabolism and learning how to feed yourself well.
Well said. I love that. We did mention exercise. Tell me how you're approaching exercise for most of your clients now. How are you prioritizing that? When we use the word cardio and we talk about doing cardio, it's funny that we even started to use that term in the 60s and 70s and maybe without much of a basis. But tell me, what are some of your like foundational things that you want most of your clients to be doing as far as the exercise piece goes?
Yeah, thanks for that. I first want to teach them that exercise is about adaptation, not energy burning effect. And I say that, maybe some of your listeners are like, well, duh. But in the modern world, the average person will say, what's the best exercise to burn X number of calories? What's the best form of cardio? Even right now there's a raging debate. I don't know if you see or know, but there's this raging debate, if I only had to lift weights or run, which one's better for me? And so there's a whole argument about which one burns more calories and blah, blah, blah. What I want my clients to understand is that exercise is about adaptation. What I mean by that is wrapped up in each one of our cells is DNA. Think of that as an instruction booklet for the body, but not every one of those genes are expressed optimally. And this is the researched realm of what we call epigenetics. That is, which parts of me are turned on and which parts of me are turned off. The turning on of a gene is called methylation. The turning off of a gene is called acylation. And so when I approach training my clients, whether they're in really, really good shape or they're just getting started in the exercise world and don't know where to go, what I want them to understand is exercise can be used like a sledgehammer. I'm going to beat myself into a better shape. I don't subscribe to that method. Or exercise can be used as a scalpel. We can be really intelligent and really precise about the stressors that we put our body to, and we will achieve a specific result. And so with that said, I want my clients to know that whatever changes we make, the goal is to create an adaptation, not to beat ourselves into some sort of shape or to burn a whole bunch of calories or whatever. I want to achieve an adaptation. I'll give an example because I didn't mean to be long-winded here, but when I want to help somebody grow some muscle mass, they say, "Hey, Alex, I'm wrestling with my blood sugar. Hey, I'm wrestling with pain. Hey, I'm 50 and I can see the writing on the wall that I'm losing functionality and I don't want to lose functionality." I'll say, "Great, we need to invest in some muscle tissue. We need to grow some muscle tissue on you." And they're like, "I don't want to be a bodybuilder. Here, let me show you the studies about health span and muscle mass and how important it is for your blood sugar to have an extra 1 to 3 pounds of muscle mass on you." And once I've helped them understand that, then the question is, what stressor do we need to apply to create the adaptation of muscle mass? What do we need to put your body through that will tell your body, "Hey, the muscle fibers I have right now, they're not enough. Hey, the muscle fibers that I have right now, they're not healthy enough. Hey, the muscle fibers I have right now don't have enough resources to pull from. I don't have strong enough tendons and ligaments to support increased muscle fiber," right? And so we put the body through the stressors that are required in order to create the adaptation of improved muscle mass. And the research bears that out, that 3 to 4 at a minimum, 3 to 4 exercises 3 times a week of compound strength-based movements for 3 to 4 sets of 10 repetitions at a relatively heavy weight. In layman's terms, do big movements with heavy enough weight that it's hard. Those things can create an epigenetic methylation of our DNA, which results in larger muscle tissue. And that actually sticks around. If I make those changes now, a year from now, those genes are still methylated. I actually can teach my body that it's better for me to have some muscle mass that I didn't have before, and then to keep that in my life. And so that's the primary thing I want to teach, is that exercise is an adaptive stressor, not a sledgehammer. And we're going to apply that intelligently in our program on a daily basis.
And I wish I would have known that on the first day of being a personal trainer. I would have trained people so differently than I do today, for sure. And understanding that is so, so critical. So I love that. And we've been talking a lot about genes and epigenetics and all that stuff. And you mentioned something offline that I really don't know that much about. Can you tell us about the endurance gene and what you've learned about that? This is something I don't know a ton about.
Yeah. So in the genomic research and epigenetic side of things, what we're starting to do is twofold. One, we're starting to look at correlations, not causation, because you can't say, there's Casey as an embryo, let's splice in this gene and then see how he does in his life. Like, we haven't gotten to Gattaca levels of gene splicing, and I don't know if that would be a great thing either. I feel like there's a zombie movie or two about that. But what we have started to do is we've started to look at clusters of genes and the phenotype outcomes, meaning let's say that you have this cluster of genes that we've noticed seems to correlate with a higher VO2. And the question is, if we put Casey on a treadmill, does he have a higher VO2 than the rest of the population on average? And so we're starting that research. And then the other thing, and this is what's very fascinating to me, the other thing we're doing is we're starting to research what happens when you tell people about the genes they have. And so there's this amazing study. It came out during COVID, so it didn't get any publicity because we were all very distracted. But to me, this is just a mind-blowing thing, and you'll appreciate this as a former metabolic technician. They did this very, very powerful study. There was 22 participants in a college atmosphere, and what they did is they tested their genes for whether or not they had this cluster of genes related to endurance. Things that seem to be correlated with higher VO2, things that seem to be correlated with more type 1 muscle fibers versus type 2. Type 1 muscle fibers are those endurance fibers, whereas type 2 muscle fibers are those fast twitch, power-based muscle fibers. And then this cluster of genes that seems to be related to burning fat very well as a fuel source as opposed to carb dependence, right? So all these things would result in greater endurance. So they took this group of participants, they put them on a treadmill, and this is very similar to the metabolic test that we used to do. We would let them go for a minute and then increase the difficulty, increase the incline, increase the speed, right? And let them go until they gave up. Like, oh, this is too much, I can't do anymore, right? And so they told the participants, we're testing for the endurance gene. We're gonna check this test out. You're gonna do something like you're gonna try to endure, and then we're gonna bring you back in a few weeks and tell you whether or not you have the gene and retest you just to confirm our results. That's what they told them. Well, what they did is they randomly assigned these individuals to the, I have the endurance gene, but I'm told I don't. And the, I don't have the endurance gene, but I'm going to be told that I do, right? They randomly assigned them and then they brought them back. And so they sat them down and said, hey, you have the endurance gene. Hey, you don't have the endurance gene. And so effectively what this does is it creates four subjects. There's the person on one end of the spectrum who has the endurance gene and knows they have the endurance gene, right? Pretty cool. Then there's the person who has the endurance gene but is told they don't. Then there's the person who does not have the endurance gene but is told they don't. So they have the truth. And then finally, this is the wackiest group. They do not have the endurance gene, but they are told they do. And so they all get back on the treadmill and they do this thing. And you might think, okay, well, like what's gonna happen? Well, what happened in the trial is that the people who had the gene and were told they had the gene performed the best. They did about 3 minutes longer than they did in their previous trial. And you could say, okay, that's belief. That's a top-down processing thing. Makes plenty of sense to me. The people in the middle weren't that interesting. The ones who had the gene but were told they didn't, they actually stopped sooner. Just like the people who didn't have the gene but were told that they didn't, they stopped sooner too. This is the crazy one though. The people who did not have the gene but were told you have the endurance gene, they outperformed the people who had the gene and believed they did. They increased their time by 5 minutes. But this is the kicker. They also measured carbon dioxide buffering, which is a physiological thing, not a belief thing, right? And what they found is if you believed you had the gene, you buffered carbon dioxide better. And the group who didn't believe that they had the endurance gene, even if they did, they buffered carbon dioxide worse than their previous test. So at a physiological level, the belief about who I am changes how my body responds to exercise. That is freaking crazy. That's nuts. That's crazy town. Because you think about mindset and how important it is when I approach my nutrition or when I approach my exercise. We're just starting to scrape the surface of what happens to me physiologically when I go into the weight room and I go, I have Ehlers-Danlos. I'm not going to be very good at this. Well, I'm going to try. Versus, I have Ehlers-Danlos. I am going to do the best with the hand I've been dealt, and I'm not going to let it get in my way. Those are two completely different mindsets that I can take in my own workout, right? And the research seems to suggest, and it's continuing to grow, that it actually matters which one of these mindsets I bring to my workout. And who knows what the limit to that is.
Dude, I've got chills. That is
No joke.
crazy. Okay, so selfishly, like the first thing I'm thinking about this, I want to bottle this up and I want to give this to my clients. How do you take that knowledge and share that with your clients?
Thank you for that. If you'll notice throughout our entire conversation, hey, where do we start with nutrition? Where do we start with exercise? For me, I start with the belief. I start with, what do I believe about exercise? Well, I believe exercise is a great way to burn calories. Exercise is a powerful way to create adaptations in my own body. But I also start with the idea that exercise is a good, no matter who you are. Like, you need to be moving, right? And so I'm helping my clients understand their beliefs about their food and about their nutrition and about the stress and time management in their life, all those things. I want to package that in a way that it's a very simple mindset. It's a very simple mantra. It's a very simple one-line thing. Why am I exercising right now? Because it's going to bring out the best in me. Why am I eating this right now? Because it's worth building myself out of this thing, right? Why am I going to bed early? Because I want my tomorrow to be much better, right? All those things. I want to address the belief first, and I want to deal with obstacles to belief. Oh, I've done this before and I failed. Right. Well, this is different this time because we're not doing Weight Watchers, man. or I hate running. Like, okay, I'm not going to make you a runner, but can you be a guy who runs sometimes? Like, if that's going to be beneficial for your health, can you be a guy who runs sometimes? You don't have to be a runner. Oh, I don't want to lift weights. I'm going to be a bodybuilder. Okay. Is it worth investing in healthy muscle? We don't have to be a bodybuilder, but is it worth taking some steps to invest in healthy muscle? So for myself, I'm very careful and intentional about how I articulate this with my clients. And part of our intake process is to try to identify some of those limiting beliefs and move them forward in a positive direction.
Amazing. Wow. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's super cool. Okay. So I wanted to hear your insights on this. So Mormons are Christians. We did study the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament. Mormons also have the Book of Mormon, which is an additional story in other scriptures. There's a whole other book that they believe in, which is all about like modern revelations that was given to mostly Joseph Smith in the 1800s. And amongst those scriptures are scriptures that relate to nutrition, how people should be eating, and a code. And this code is quite famous in the Mormon religion, which is called the Word of Wisdom. And it's basically the reason why Mormons don't drink, they don't smoke. And in there, it's open to interpretation, right? You know how scripture is. Scripture,
Yeah.
it's written in a certain way, and you can take it one way, you can take it literally, you can take it figuratively. There's the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, blah, blah, blah. Most people in the Mormon religion take this word of wisdom to say, when it says something like, you should partake of the fruits and vegetables, thereof, in the world thereof, that kind of thing. And they take it to say, oh, we should be following a plant-based diet, forgetting the fact that this revelation was received in February of 1831 in Ohio, where there would not have been fruits and vegetables growing. And it says specifically, like, you should enjoy these in a certain season. And then some people ignore other scriptures they're in that same book in a different chapter that say, like, you should not avoid red meat. I'm very much paraphrasing. You can tell I'm not an expert in quoting scripture. But I'm curious to know, like, as it pertains to the Bible, are there any clues in there that you can think of that help, kind of steer us in the direction of the way we should be living our lives, especially when it pertains to nutrition?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think of this both in a joking manner and in a serious manner. So I'm going to make some jokes first. And if you don't like biblical humor, I'm super sorry. But one of the things that I would say, that if I don't pick on you, I don't like you. Do you ever say that? Like in real life with real people, if I don't pick on you, that means I don't like you. And in the same way, I love the Bible and I love the scriptures, and there is some humor to be found in here, especially if you are a nutrition nerd. So I would harken back to the very beginning with Cain and Abel, right? So as the story goes, if you're not familiar with the story of Cain and Abel, basically Adam and Eve, they're the first man, first woman, they're created. They have two sons, Cain and Abel. And it says that Cain is basically a vegetable gardener, and Abel is a keeper of the flocks. He's a sheep herder, right? And it says that Abel brings the first fruits of his flock to God as a sacrifice, and Cain brings his whatever vegetables to the to God as a sacrifice. And it says specifically in the King James Version that the Lord had respect for Cain, or excuse me, the Lord had respect for Abel's offering, but for Cain's offering, he did not have respect. In other words, I really like what Abel brought me, and I don't like what Cain brought me. And so if you ask me what that had to say about nutrition, there's plenty of theological underpinnings, but I would say that if I invited God to have dinner at my house, we're having barbecue, not salad, because he was like, no, I'm good. Like and there's some theological underpinnings that Cain didn't bring his best, fine, whatever. But there is this idea that even in the beginning, one of the most valuable things that individuals could be growing, could be proliferating, could be bringing to God as a sacrifice was high protein, high fat stuff, man. That was valuable. Could you imagine being in like the Middle East thousands of years ago? You're like, I could really go for some spinach. That's not gonna tide you over like a lamb is, man. It's just not gonna do it. But also jokingly, I like to bring this up. Have you ever heard of the Daniel diet? Is that a thing you've heard of?
I don't know that I have. That's a new one.
Okay, so in the book of Daniel, the Israelites have been conquered by King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians, and he takes in the smart, scholarly young men, the cream of the crop of Israel, and he wants them to be his magistrates, his scholars. He wants them to serve in his kingdom, and so Daniel and his friends, being Israelites, being Jews, say, we're not going to partake in the food rations that we've been given, specifically the meat sacrificed to idols, because in the Jewish law, you don't do that. You don't eat meat sacrificed to idols. And so they don't partake in this, and the soldier is really concerned about this. The person who's in charge of their well-being tells Daniel, he's like, this is a bad idea, because when you lose weight, I'm gonna get killed for not taking good care of you. And Daniel says, hey, look, I understand your concern. Daniel actually recommends that we use the scientific method here. I understand your concern. If we do this for a period of time and we start to lose weight, we'll do it your way. So he's like, okay, fine, like great, have your experiment. And it says, this is really funny. This is the Daniel fast. So they spent time just eating fruits and vegetables. And in the translated version, it says they got fatter than the rest of them. And so the soldier was fine, and their way of life was vindicated and stuff. But I always like to pick on individuals following the Daniel fast. I'm like, if you're doing this to lose weight, you read the wrong version. Because apparently your vegetable fruit-based diet's going to make you fatter, and so that's tongue-in-cheek fun. But more specifically, when we actually talk about this, the first 10 days of the Faithful Fitness devotional is devoted to integrity. Integrity is the spiritual discipline of keeping the foundation firm, of building your house on a rock. These are all biblical ideas. And that is to say, hey, the structure of my body, what's it built out of? What am I consuming on a regular basis? And I think this is particularly important in the New Testament. Jesus says in the Lord's Prayer, he says, Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day your daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses. And he continues. And what does that mean? Jesus isn't saying, let's make sure we get to eat bread today. The word bread there means two things. It means sustenance and something good to do with it. So the prayer that he's teaching his disciples to pray is to be intentional about asking for the right food, and also to go use that food well, not to sit around. God's not going to provide good food for you to eat so you can just sit here and twiddle your thumbs. We got stuff to do. We've got good work to be up to. And so I teach that from a biblical perspective for my clients on a regular basis. Hey, we're going to be intentional about the food that we're consuming. We're not going to be mindless. We're not going to eat whatever comes to mind. Like this is a holy and important thing to be grateful for and to plan for. And we want to consume foods that allow us to go do what we're here to do. We want to consume foods that enable us to live healthy lives, that remove disease from our body. We want to consume those foods. And so in that way, I think the Bible has a lot to teach us about feeding ourselves intentionally and the way God created us to consume food, not Doritos and Pringles and goldfish and all the other stuff we can be eating, but that there's also some fun tongue-in-cheek stuff that people have taken out of context and I think are hilarious.
This is a sermon I can get behind, my friend. That was amazing. Thank you for sharing that. No, I do love that interpretation in all seriousness. Like that I believe there's a lot of those kind of messages in, holy scriptures that you can interpret again, by the letter of the law that maybe should be interpreted by the the spirit of the law and interpreted in that way. So I really appreciate that. Tell us about the new book, man. How did you bring all this stuff together and write your new book?
Man, it was the hardest thing I've ever done, honestly. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. And I've done some intense endurance events. I'm a father of two. I married my wife. I'm just kidding. She's awesome. She's easy to be married to. But this book, for my part, I've been wrestling and struggling with how my physical fitness practice and my faith, how they relate, if at all. The writer of Ecclesiastes says, vanity, vanity, all is vanity. In other words, why would I invest in this body if I really believe that at the end of my life, it's just going to be food for worms? Like, why would I spend time trying to feed myself well? Why would I spend time exercising? That's time I should be doing something else, right? And I believe that's actually a very, I believe it's a foundational belief in a lot of Christian circles, that the body's temporal and fleshly and sinful and all those things. And so it's kind of sidelined and kind of made a joke. I heard my pastor one time stand on stage and joke about eating oatmeal cream pies. Man, Arkansas is the third fattest state in the nation. We've got so much diabetes. Stumbling blocks, bro, stumbling blocks, right? And it's not his fault. It's the way the Christian community tends to think. And so I really wrestled with, how do I bring these thoughts together in my own life in a way that is useful for other individuals. And so I when I sat down to write a book, I did not sit down to write a devotional. No, like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to tell people what to think about the Bible and how, like, tap into some of the deepest, darkest places in their life and wrestle with that every day. Like, I did not sit down to do that. But what I did find is that there's no other way to learn that than to walk through it. Kind of like a workout program. If I hand a client a perfect workout program and I say, hey, this will really help you, and they just stare at it, it's not going to do anything. They have to do it every day. They have to practice it every day. And so what I found is the devotional was the best conduit to bring the science and discipline of nutrition and exercise together with the practice of meditation, prayer, and biblical understanding. So I wrote a devotional, and if you had told me 10 years ago that's what I'd be doing, I'd be like, you're absolutely crazy. But I'm very excited for it. It comes out in September, and the publication process is going great.
Amazing. Wow. Okay. Honest question. Are you niched in and focused on Christians, or is this a book that somebody like myself who doesn't consider themselves a Christian could also appreciate for all the concepts?
Yeah, 100%. As long as the Bible's not a turnoff to you, right? So like I wrote it from a Christian worldview, but packed it with the practical science that I've learned from exercise and nutrition. And I work really hard in the book not to use a lot of Christianese. In other words, like, unless you attend church on a regular basis, you have no idea what I just said to you. It's really important to me that it speaks to both aspects of the audience. They're going to be Christians who read this book who never thought about fitness as a spiritual process or spiritual act. And they're going to start understanding that their body is a deep part of that journey. And then there are going to be non-Christians who read this book who are like, hey, I'm into fitness. I love fitness. And I've heard some of the things that Alex puts out in the world, and they're useful to me. I'm curious where these two things intersect. And I hope to bring the faith aspect in a way that's coupled with fitness, that when you read it, you're like, oh, my fitness is much more meaningful than I understood it to be. My nutrition practice is much more meaningful than I understood it to be. And my responsibility and my influence in the world around me is much more meaningful than I understand it to be too. So I wrote it in a way that I hope both camps can understand.
Very cool. Well, I hope you have conversions either way. It sounds like it was written very mindfully, which does not surprise me at all. Alex, this has been an awesome conversation. Let's make sure that we have these more, because I certainly learned a lot. You're just such a top-notch educator, and I really appreciate you taking the time to be on our show again. Where would you like people to go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Yeah, thanks for that. You can find me at betterdaily.live. You'll find all my links there. You can find the devotional at betterdaily.live/devo. We're doing signed pre-orders with a cool shirt. And then also you can find me on YouTube or the podcast. Search Faithful Fitness. It'll pop up there.
Excellent. We will link to all of that in the show notes. And like I said, this has been an amazing episode. I really appreciate all the work that you have put in, and like you were alluding to, like walking the walk, doing the steps that it take to get to where you were. Like I said, like you said, 10 years ago, imagining that you'd be able to do this. Well, you took steps, right? Like it wasn't just all of a sudden you have this book. Like you took the steps, you did the work, and yeah, so grateful for all the work that you put in. And thank you so much again for taking time on our show today. I always enjoy our chats, and we really, really appreciate you.
Thanks, Casey. I'm looking forward to having you on my show soon because I know you have a lot of
can't
things
wait
to say too.
Can't wait, man. Looking forward to that as well. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.